Good morning, everybody. Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, verse 11. Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to make merry. There's a Spanish story about a father and son who had become estranged. In other words, they had gotten angry at one another and had split and not spoken with one another. The son ran away, and the father set off to find him. He searched for months to no avail. Finally, in a last desperate effort to find his son, the father put an ad in a Madrid newspaper. The ad read this way: Dear Paco, that was the name of his son, Paco. Dear Paco, meet me in front of this newspaper office at noon on Saturday. All is forgiven. I love you. Your father. On that Saturday, 800 men named Paco showed up, looking for forgiveness and love from their fathers. 800 different guys named Paco throughout Madrid had read the ad and thought that it was their own father that they had come back to make amends with. There are many of us in here who have some fantastic dads. Not one of us has a perfect dad. And I've got some news for you. Those of us that have dads, none of those dads have perfect children. All of us are a mess. That is the truth. If you are having issues with your dad, I want to say this. I want to say welcome to the club. I have not seen nor spoken with my dad for 10 plus years. I think that he lives in the city of Colton, but I don't know. I don't know where he lives. He knows where I live. There's a lot of history there. But the reason I'm telling you that is because, and by the way, that's not necessarily by my choice. It's a long story. But I want you to understand that there isn't a perfect dad in the world. Some of you are thinking right now, I don't even have a dad. I don't even know where my dad is. And I would say, again, welcome to the club. Okay? As we consider Father's Day, and as we look at the story of the Prodigal Father, and we'll talk about the Prodigal Father. I thought that was called the Prodigal Son. Ha! Prodigal Father is what it is. And we'll talk about that, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But maybe you're thinking, maybe you're one of those people that's thinking, I don't have a good dad. Well, then as we go through this, you young men, what you want to do is you want to say, hey, I don't have a good dad, so this doesn't mean anything for me let's just, skip out of here. No, what you want to do is you want to take notes on what a good dad looks like, so that as you get a little bit older and you get married and you begin to have your own kids, because you will. It's all part of the curse, man. You're going to have your own kids. As you begin to have your own kids, you have a model of what kind of dad you ought to be. And perhaps for you young ladies that are in here thinking, well, I don't have a dad, and so who cares? I hate the holiday, and this doesn't have anything to do with me, even less than it has anything to do, But here's what you want to do, is you want to begin to pray for your husband, because one of these days you'll be a little bit older, and you will get married, and you will have kids, okay? And what kind of husband do you want and father do you want for your own kids? This is an incredible model here that we get in Luke chapter 15. Pick it up at verse 11 once again. We are going to, actually I didn't put all, normally I would put all the main divisions on there, on there, on there, on there, on there. They're not coming, it's not working. But what I'll do is we will just hit those main divisions as we go through. Verse 11 brings us to our first section. Verses 11 through 19 are titled Giving. Giving. Okay? Then he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. Now, there's a discussion about whether this was a parable or not. It's not introduced as a parable. Oftentimes when a parable is being shared by Jesus, it will say, then he shared this parable with them. It doesn't do this here. I tend to wonder and think, and I like to think that this is an actual event that Jesus witnessed for himself. It says, then he said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them says to the father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. Now, this would have been unheard of. Now, when the younger son asks for the portion that falls to him, let me tell you what kind of a deal this is. When this father, when this dad, this prodigal father, as he was getting older and getting closer to death, he would at some point take the time to say, okay, I'm getting ready to leave this world and I'm leaving you. And he would generally bring the oldest son first, and he would receive the biggest portion and say, I'm leaving, but I'm leaving this portion to you. And then he would also have something set aside for the younger son. But it would have been extremely disrespectful for either of the sons to come to the dad and say, hey, I want my portion now. But especially so for the younger son. So right away, like right out of the gate, we see that this younger son really was being disrespectful toward his dad in asking this. It was almost as if he was saying, Dad, would you just hurry up and die so that I can get my portion? Now, he doesn't say, Dad, can you hurry up and die? He's more interested in the portion rather than interested in his father. And that's what we get right away. He's more interested in what's coming to him, what's his, rather than what his dad, how his dad feels, what his dad thinks. He is not concerned, you can see, with what his older brother is going to receive. So we see right away that this young man is a selfish young man, not concerned with anyone else around him, only with what he can get out of the deal. And I'm going to point out some lessons as we go through here. You want to make sure, you and I want to make sure, if you've got a dad at home, you want to make sure that, and actually, I should not even say just a dad. You ought to be concerned about everybody around you. But in this case, because it's Father's Day and we're looking at a Father's Day message, what this young man ought to have been doing is being concerned about his father and about assisting his father and helping his father, rather than in what can I get out of the deal. Okay, that is generally how relationships work nowadays. Is I'm in this relationship to get, and when you can't give me anything else, then I'm done with this relationship. And that's the type of relationship that this young man had with his dad, sadly. So, Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me. So the dad, and I would assume and guess that there was lots of discussion going on within this verse 12. But when it was all said and done, it says at the end of verse 12, so he divided to them his livelihood. In other words, he went ahead and said, okay, to the older son, this is going to be your portion, and to the younger son, this is going to be your portion. Okay? And not many days after, in verse 13, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. Now, we're going to spend several verses looking at the son, but again, that's not the focus of our time today. I want you to notice at the end of verse 12, so he divided to them his livelihood. That's where we get our first point, in that this father was giving. Now, we can analyze and say, well, why did he even give the son, and why did he do this or why did he do that? But in the end, we see that the father was giving. Now, it's interesting that the son was completely dependent on the father. He did not have enough resources on his own to leave. He needed the father's resources in order to go. And you notice that the father was willing at some point, and again, I must assume after some discussion and probably some struggle, I'm sure he did not want by the way the story goes, he did not want his son to leave. But in the end, he was willing to divide. He was willing to give. Now, those of us that have dads that are present right now, your dad may not be perfect. Your dad may not be the greatest dad. Maybe sometimes he's grouchy, sometimes he's mean, sometimes he's too busy. Whatever. It's easy to point out all of the faults. But I want you to stop and consider, how is it that you are existing today? I've got some grown kids now who are, working, of course, and making their own money and things. But when they were younger, there were times that I would have to remind them, hey, listen, if you don't like it here, I can remember telling my son one time, he was young. I said, listen, you don't like it? You can go. Leave. Just, you take whatever belongs to you. Whatever you bought with your own money, you can take. Which basically means you're leaving naked, boy. But if you want to go, go. Get to stepping. And then he understood, oh, wait a minute. My existence depends on my dad. But perhaps there are times in your life when you forget that. And how important is it to remember that? And what an opportunity we have today. Now, we ought to remember that all of the time. But what an opportunity we have today to remember that, I probably owe at least some portion of my existence to my dad. If he's there, if he's paying the bills or whatever, he's taking care of things. Yeah, I have to be thankful for that. This father was giving. He divided to them his livelihood. In other words, he split up his all that he had basically. And he said, okay, this is what you're going to get, and this is the portion that you're going to get. So in verse 13, and not many days after, the younger son gathered all together, journeyed to a far country, and there wasted his possessions with prodigal living. Now we get that word prodigal there, and we say, well, we see that this son was living this prodigal lifestyle, and we'll find out more about that later on when we look at his older brother. But if he's involved in this prodigal living, why is this called the prodigal father? Well, that word prodigal can mean two different things. They are similar, very closely related. Prodigal living, as we read here in verse 13, means to be wasteful. It means that you have resources, or whatever it is that you have, you just give it all away. We've got a little bit of talking in the back. Do I have a leader that can go back there and just say, hey, quiet down, back in that back corner over there for me? Yeah, just keep an eye out. Oh, wait a minute, we got Brooke over there. Brooke, you've got my permission. You can throw things at him. You do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Brooke's a mom. Start slapping. What did I tell you in the back of your head? Boom. Or chancla, take your chancla off and start swinging that thing. So he's giving. Now this younger son is living this prodigal living. Now we'll find out more about what this means a little bit later. But I'll just tell you this, that it was a wasteful lifestyle, wasteful living. It says in verse 14, but when he had spent all. When he had spent all. So this son takes, I want you to keep in mind, what does he have? He has this inheritance from his father. Like, this is all he's going to get. And by the time we get to verse 14, he is completely out of money, completely out of resources. It's wasteful living. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. It has always been so funny to me. Again, I'm a dad. I've got kids. I'm speaking with authority right now, because some of you are not going to like this, but I'm going to say it anyways. It is so funny how generous my kids used to be. They used to be so generous because it was my money they were spending. Like, hey, can we, get this new PlayStation, or can we get this whatever? When our first PlayStation broke, that was it. I was done. Like, I'm not buying another one. No, I don't play the PlayStation. You want to buy it? You could buy your own. We don't have money. Well, then I guess you're not playing PlayStation. And for years, we didn't have PlayStation. And we survived. Barely, but we survived. But it's funny how generous my kids were when they were spending my money. And it is so funny how cheap they are now that they're spending their own money. Like, oh, you're going to the store? Look, do us a favor, we're kind of low on bread. Could you pick up a loaf of bread? Ah. And then they come home with like the 56-cent old, day-old bread. Like, seriously? Like, this is what I fed you when you were growing up? Like, this is, we don't even want to take this to Succumbi Lake and feed it to the ducks. It is extremely funny to me how cheap they have gotten. And that's what happens. I was talking, actually, Pastor Todd and I were talking one day, and he was talking about how he's got to keep, Pastor Todd is the pastor for the young adults. And he says, yeah, I've got to keep the camps that they do, the retreats, as cheap as possible. He said, because the young adults will always, remind me how much money they don't have. He said, but it's funny, it's like, every time we have a study, they've always got money to go to Starbucks after. But they don't have it for the retreats. I don't know what the deal is with that. This young man here spent it all. He had the resources, it's gone. And in verse 14, there arose a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. So he is, at this point, very shortly after receiving all of the resources, he is destitute. He's got nothing. And in verse 15, then he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed the swine. And he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate. And no one gave him anything. So as this young man, he's absolutely destitute. He's wasted all of the money that he got from his dad. And now he finds himself out in this field feeding swine, and he's so hungry that he wanted to eat what the pigs were eating. But nobody would even give him. They were feeding the pigs and not feeding him because they couldn't care less. And this is oftentimes where I shouldn't say where people can find themselves when they've got no discipline, when they've been selfish, when they've taken from others and it's all wasted, it's all gone. They can find themselves living like animals. It is incredible. It's been incredible to me over the years, being involved in ministry for so many years now, to see the extremes that people will go to. Once they've parted ways with their family, once they've left following the Lord, and they're back into the world, and they're trying to live it up, and it's incredible to me. I've seen young men that were in the junior high and high school youth group. Just not too long ago, I saw one of them at Target. He did not recognize me. He was so smoked out on whatever he smoked out on, and he was digging through the trash in front of Target. Um, it happens because he was disobedient to God, obviously disobedient to parents. This young man, full of life when he was in high school, junior high, and but wasted it all, living on the streets, digging through a trash can at Target, looking for receipts to go back into Target to try and return things, always scheming, always trying to get more money for his next hit. And this is that type of a young man here. It's prodigal living, it's wasteful living. So he's out there feeding the swine. He's so hungry, it's like, I want to eat the pig's food, but nobody will give me any. Verse 17. But when he came to himself, he said, look what he says, when he finally came to his senses, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I am dying with hunger. I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Now, most of the time when we go through this story, this passage, we're focused on the prodigal son. And we look at him and we say, oh man, look how bad he got, but man, he really turned it around, and look how great he was, and things really worked out for him. But I want you to understand something. I want you to notice in verse 18, I will arise and go to my father and will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. Let me ask you a question. What was going on in this young man's mind that as he comes to his senses, the first thought he has is to go back to his father? Why in the world would he think that his father would ever receive him back after all of this mess? Anybody got a clue? Anybody got a guess as to why this young man thought that his dad would accept him, would receive him back? Anybody? This is the sleepy service right here. Third service will be on it. Anybody? Rachel in the back. Look at that. Go ahead. He knew that his dad was compassionate. He knew his dad. He knew, oh, I can go back to dad. Dad will forgive me. And so it tells us something, though it doesn't say it outright, it tells us something about the dad. That this dad was not only giving, but he was also forgiving. And we'll talk about forgiving. We'll point that out in just a few minutes. But not only was this dad giving, but the son knew that he was forgiving. I used to coach soccer when my kids were younger, and I remember a dad coming one time and he's like, man, I got my son on the team, little boys, right, ladies? You know how little boys are. Space case, right? Spacey. And he says, man, I can't get him to do anything. Like he just runs around and, he doesn't listen to me. I said, the problem is he knows that dad loves him. So he figures, man, this is my soccer field. I can do whatever I want. I got dad. Dad's got my back. This young man knew, hey, dad's got my back. I've blown it. I've wasted the fortune that he gave me. I've wasted my portion of all of that. But I know my dad, and my dad will forgive me. So let me ask you a quick question before we move on to our next section. What about your dad? Again, those of you that have a dad at home, is your dad forgiving? Well, I would say, yeah. I probably don't know your dad. Some of your dads I know. But he must be forgiving. You're still alive. He did not snatch the life out of you at some point. Although he probably, I won't even say probably, I'm sure at some point he felt like it. I know I felt like it plenty of times. Like, I had to just snatch you right out of this world right now. What are you thinking? With my own kids. So, your dad is probably forgiving. Now, again, let me give you some application in case you're one of those people that's thinking, I don't even have a dad. I don't even know where my dad's at, right? Part of that club. Welcome to the club. Listen, what about you? Young men, what kind of dad do you want to be? Do you want to do the same thing that your dad did to you? You want to be the same way? If not, take a lesson. I need to be giving. I need to be forgiving. Again, we'll talk about, we'll see his forgiveness here. We read through it already, but we'll see it here in just a moment. You young ladies, as you consider, if you young ladies that perhaps don't have a dad at home, what kind of, as you dream and think about your future, and I know that you do. Do you see yourself married to some brute, some nasty old dude who's mean to your kids? No, obviously you don't. You see fairy tale. By the way, the guys don't see it, okay, ladies? I'm just telling you. They do not see it. They are clueless. You young ladies are thinking fairy tale. And you're thinking, you're thinking, this knight in shining armor is going to come. I know what you're thinking. That's what you dream of. And as you consider that, and one of these days you will be married, and you will have kids. What kind of man, what kind of husband, what kind of father do you want for your children? So right now you can take notes, and as you begin to pray throughout the coming years, you can say, God, give me one of these prodigal fathers. We'll talk about why he's prodigal here in just a moment. And so this young man in verses 18 to 19 says, hey, I just came to my senses. I got to go back and see my dad. My dad loves me, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to beg him to take me back in, and I'll just be one of his servants. I won't even be considered his son anymore, but at least I can go back and I can eat. Now, verse 20. So in verse 20 we find this out. Let's see if this is working. No, not yet. I'm not sure. It's probably just the batteries. Change them after. The second thing is that he is compassionate. Look at this in verse 20. And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion. We'll stop there for just a moment. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him. I wonder how long this young man was gone. It doesn't seem like he was gone for that long. But I wonder how much time the father spent checking the horizon, looking down that dirt road, looking for the silhouette of his son returning home, looking for maybe the familiar walk of his son, waiting, expecting, hoping for this son to come home. What a touching scene this is. Because when this young man, as he's making his way back, but when he was still a great way off, his father saw him. So it doesn't say that the son saw the father, although obviously he would have, but it makes the point of saying that the father saw him. Evidently the father was looking for him and spotted him, spotted his silhouette, spotted his form out there a ways while he was still a great way off. And it says that he had compassion. At that point, as there's still separation between him and his son, he sees him afar off, but he immediately has compassion on this young man, on his son. The first thought in his mind is not, I'm going to beat this kid. I want my money back. How dare him disrespect me this way? His first thought is compassion. He sees his son coming. I don't know if he could tell immediately the condition of his son. Maybe he had lost weight. Maybe his clothes were worn. Who knows? I don't know. But as he sees him, he immediately has compassion. What an incredible thought. What an incredible thought. And how many of us as dads, and we've got a few dads in here, how many of us as dads, if we've been wronged by our kids, the first thought is compassion. I'm going to tell you right now, that's not always my first thought. That is not always my first thought. Sometimes it's the last thought. Sometimes after I've already blown it in my response, then it's, I should have had compassion. I've done that far too often. This father is compassionate towards his son. His heart is moved toward his son. And it says that he ran. Now let's stop there for just a moment, because we hear this story, we blow through it and move right along. But we're focusing on the father and not on the son. I want you to understand that it says here that the father ran. The son evidently doesn't say that the son ran toward him. I mean, now put yourself in the place of this prodigal son. As you've disrespected your father, you've wasted the resources that he gave you, and you're making your way back, and you see your dad, and he comes running at you. What's the first thought in your mind? Run. Yes. Like, I'd be looking at his hands, like, is he holding a stick? It's like he's coming back, and he's running at me. He ran. Let's talk about running. Let's talk about running in ancient times. They would have most likely had some long garments on. If he was working, he may have, the father, if he was working, he may have girded that thing up, pulled it up a little bit. Maybe he had a belt or something tied around his waist. But in order to run, he would have had to pull that thing up a little bit higher. Those of you that are cross-country runners, man, those little shorts. Right? Nobody likes those. My son ran cross-country, and it's like, tiny little shorts, but then you just get used to it. He has compassion. He would have had to pull up his garment a little bit higher in order to run toward his son, in order to extend his legs. It wasn't like a tight little thing, and he just made a bunch of little steps out there. I'm coming, son, He would have girded that thing up. Now, let's talk about this dad for just a moment. Understand that his son has disrespected him. Surely the community would have known about it. So he's been dishonored, disrespected by his son, dishonored, in probably everyone's eyes. They're probably, oh man, there he goes, the one with the prodigal son or whatever. He seemingly does not care anything about that. He sees his son, and immediately his heart is moved with compassion. And there seems to be no thought to his own dignity. He pulls his garment up high enough that he can run toward his son. And once he gets there, I like this, he fell on his neck. That's what I'm talking about. Fall on that boy's neck. With an elbow, boom, right? And just set him straight. That is not what he does. When it says that he fell on his neck, what does it mean? It means that he wrapped himself, he wrapped that boy in his arms and buried his face in his son's neck. And that he began to kiss him. We see here, I told you that he is compassionate, but the next thing that we see is that he is affectionate. Now, I fail here also as a dad. I've been failing. I'm a pro at failing, messing up as a dad. Being compassionate, I have fallen short so many times. Affectionate, I still struggle with it. Showing affection. Here, this dad has got no qualms, does not care who's watching, who's looking. It doesn't matter that he's girded himself up, looking silly. Doesn't matter that he's running, and that would be undignified. When he gets there, he wraps his son in his arms and he began to kiss him. Now, if your dad is giving, if he is compassionate, if he is affectionate, you've got a great dad. I can remember my mom. Man, she always wanted to hug me and kiss me and be like, all right, lady, come on, lay off. My dad, very rarely, I won't even say very rarely, he didn't do it. I remember twice him telling me that he loved me. Now, I knew that he loved me, but he only told me twice. And any kind of hugs were extremely rare and awkward. Some of you know what I'm talking about, yes? Some of you are like, yeah, it's okay, you don't have to raise your hand. Some of you are like, oh, that's awkward. I remember seeing a dad one time, and his son, his son was a little bit older, like probably in his teens at that time, And I did not know this dad, this son. I saw them, and this dad was holding his son's hand, walking him, because the son had some sort of, he was challenged, like mentally, something like that. I mean, he was walking, so he wasn't physically challenged, but it was mental. And for a split second, I said, man, how sad. And then God spoke to my heart right there and said, but is it really? Like, don't you wish that you could, and I was a teenager, don't you wish that you could still hold your dad's hand? It's like, there's no way I'd ever do that. I'm a teenage guy. Can't hold your dad's hand. But it was one of those moments where God was like, no, but this is actually a good thing. This is actually a good thing. And there are some of us who, man, our dads, maybe your dad's affectionate, likes to give hugs and kisses, and you just feel like, oh, man, come on, you know. Listen, affection is a godly attribute. It is a good thing. And if you've got one of those dads that's giving and compassionate and affectionate, listen, you've got something to be thankful for today. He falls on him and kisses him. I can still, there's a lot that I don't remember, but I can still remember coming home at night. I was still living with my parents, obviously, and I was 19. No, I'm sorry, I was 18. And no, I'm sorry. See, I'm telling you, I can't remember. I'm sorry. I got married at 21. I got saved at 20. I was 20 years old, came home, and my dad and my two sisters were in the kitchen right there. As soon as you walk in, and I walked in, and they were talking, and I think there was some music going, and I said, my mom wasn't home, she was at work, and I said, hey, I need to talk to you guys. And they said, well, they saw something right away on my face, and they said, what's up? And I said, it was like it just spilled out. I said, I got my girlfriend pregnant. I'm gonna be a dad. And I just started to, I mean, this is like, goodness, this is 27 years ago, and I'm getting ready to cry right now. I can remember coming in and saying that, and my dad had already told me, my dad had already said to me, prior to that, you get your girlfriend pregnant, you can pack your stuff up and leave. So I fully expected to come in. I thought that was going to be my last night at home. Like I was going to come home, explain that, and then pack my things up and leave. And I will never, ever forget, my dad walked over to me as I'm standing there weeping like a little baby and wrapped his arms around me and told me, it's going to be okay. And I just cried like a little kid. 20 years old, crying like a little kid. But it was my dad's reaction in that moment, when I had disrespected him, dishonored him. It was his reaction in that moment that, you know, the book of Romans, what does it say? It's your kindness that leads us to repentance. And it was at that moment that I realized, man, I had already known that I needed a relationship with the Lord. I was not saved yet. But in that moment, through him, I saw God's compassion and forgiveness and his affection toward me. And at that point, at 20 years old, I surrendered my life to the Lord, had a baby, got married at 21, and began to serve the Lord. The son says to him, as this dad is being compassionate, hugging him, kissing him, what a scene. The son says to him what he rehearsed. Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Here's the next point. We see that this prodigal father is restorative. Now, we've already begun to see that this dad is a prodigal father, and I'll talk about that here at this section. He's restorative. Notice in verses 22 and 23, he restores his possessions. But the father said to his servants, see this? That as he's hugging his son, the son begins to rehearse. Father, please forgive me. I have sinned against heaven and you, and I'm not worthy. And he's going through his spiel, and the dad is like whatever. The dad just totally he's not even, it's like, don't even bother me with all of that mess. He immediately turns to the servants, the father does, and says, bring out the best robe and put it on him. And put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. He goes on to say in verse 24, for this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. He immediately celebrates the son's return. He does not stop to ask, well, where have you been? And what did you do? And why do you look the way that you do? And why do you smell like pigs? And what did you do with my money? Where's all the things that I give? He doesn't, none of that even crosses his mind. This dad, compassionately, lovingly forgiving. I mean, this is extreme forgiveness. He immediately, he blows off whatever, doesn't matter what's in his son's past. He just turns towards the servants and says, hey, let's restore his possessions. And here's where we really see that this prodigal father, we find out why he was a prodigal father. Because prodigal doesn't just mean wasteful, but it can also mean lavish. And he lavishes his son. He lavishes him with all of these things. Notice what he says, bring out the best robe. He didn't say, hey, go get his brother's robe. Or you remember that old robe that we have that thrown in the giveaway pile to take to the Goodwill? Bring that over here. No, he says, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand. That would have been a signet ring to signify that he belonged to that family, to that house. Put a ring on his hand, sandals on his feet. It's like, was he barefoot? Raggedy clothes? And bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. He restores not only his possessions, but in verse 24, restores his position. For this, my son was dead. Notice what he said. My son. He does not deny him his place in that family. The son was ready to say, hey, I'll just be like one of your servants. I'm not worthy to be called your son. And the dad's like, nonsense. Getting the best. Restored his possessions, restored his position. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. They began to make merry. And then lastly, from verses 25 down at the bottom, we'll see that he was patient. Let's finish this up. Now his older son was in the field. And as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come. And because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. We see the first thing here in verse 28, that he was patient as he pleads. Verse 28. But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So when the older son said, well, I'm not even going in, he begins to throw a fit. I'm not even going in. The father comes out to him and begins to plead with him. You see the father's patience there as he pleads with his son. But the second thing is he's patient as he listens. Verse 28, but he was angry and would not go in. Verse 29. So he answered and said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours comes, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, remember he was living a prodigal lifestyle. He says, you killed the fatted calf for him. So this father is patient as he listens. And then lastly, verses 31 and 32, he's patient as he explains. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Now, if you've got a dad that is giving, compassionate, affectionate, restorative, patient. You may look at this list and think, well, we may all be thinking like, well, my dad's not the perfect. That's the perfect dad. My dad's not perfect. No, this was not the perfect dad. We've seen some of the highlights from this man's life. No doubt he had his faults. No doubt he had his shortcomings and his failings. Every dad does. Every dad does. If you're thinking today, well, it's Father's Day, but who cares? My dad doesn't give me what I want, or he won't do this or do that thing or whatever. Or, maybe he's giving, but he's not compassionate. Or maybe he's compassionate, but he's not affectionate. Or maybe he's affectionate, but he's not restorative. Or maybe he's restorative, but he's not patient. Or, you're looking for the faults. Listen, stop. Stop. If you've got a dad, be thankful. And today's an opportunity for you to honor him. Maybe you didn't buy him anything because whatever reason, I don't know. But I'll tell you what's going to be from a dad, to stop him, to talk to him, have a heart to heart and say, you know what? I appreciate to recognize, acknowledge, and tell him, hey, I appreciate you for being giving, for helping me with these things. Whatever it is that your dad does your dad help you with homework? Does he help you with your, whatever it is, I don't know, whatever it is, you have to analyze, you have to look at your dad and say, okay, what does my dad, what has he done and how has he helped? And maybe you look and you see, maybe you're one of those people that looks and sees a bunch of bad things. But are there any good things in there that you can be thankful for? And maybe dad's not in the home anymore. I don't know what your family's situation is, but maybe he's not in the home anymore. And so you think, well, I don't have any reason to be thankful. But maybe you do. What I want to encourage you to do today is this. If you've got your dad still at home and he's part of the family and he's active, be thankful for him today and express that to him. He may embarrass you. He may not give you everything that you want. You may not like his, style of dress. You may not like his rules. You may not like whatever. I don't know. You can talk about all the things that you don't like, but what about the good things that he does? Look at his life and say, okay, what are the highlights? And be thankful for him and express that to him today. Dad, I'm thankful that you do such and such. Now, maybe you're one of those people whose dad is not in the home. Hopefully you've still got some kind of relationship with him. And if you do, are there good things that he's done for you still, even though he's not in the home? Things that you can be thankful for. And if you're thinking, well, I don't have a dad in my life at all, I don't even know where he's at, maybe you're like me, like I don't even know, I think he lives over here, but I'm not even really sure, then that's where you turn and you don't disregard this. That's where you turn and you say, okay, if I'm a young man, as I get older and I get married and I begin to become a dad, do I want to do the same thing that I've learned? Or do I want to do these things? Do I want to be this kind of a dad? The dad that I haven't had. If you're a young lady, again, remember, if you're looking and going, well, I'm not a dad, and my dad's not around, and so who cares? No. As you get older, as you get married, what kind of husband is it? What kind of father do you want for your kids? And you can take this list and begin to pray concerning these things and say, okay, God, this is what I want. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I want because all of these attributes are godly attributes. God, this is what I desire. This is what I need. This is, as I look into the future and I have this vision of what my future is going to be, God, this is what I'm praying for. This is what I'm asking for. We've got an opportunity today to honor our dads. Take the opportunity. If you've got your dad around, be thankful. He's imperfect. Be thankful. And show him some honor. If he's not around, can you call him? Can you, whatever, text him, I don't know, and let him know, hey, I appreciate the good things that you have done. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for this morning, and we're praying that you would remind us today throughout the day the blessing, if we've got a dad around, the blessing that dad is. As imperfect as he may be in the faults and whatever else, we thank you for him. I'm even thinking right now, my dad is not around, has not been around for many, many years now. But I'm actually thankful for the years that he was around. Thinking about the little league teams and the things that he was around for. Thank you for those years. And I pray for my dad right now and ask that you would restore him and revive him and restore the relationship that he had with you. For those of us that maybe are in that situation where we've got a dad but he's not in the home anymore, we pray that we would be able to look and look at those highlights and the attributes in his life that are good and be thankful for those today and express that to him. And for those of us that don't have dads in the house and they're not an active part of our lives, that we would consider this passage and how important it is to be a prodigal father, to be a father that lavishes his kids with blessings. Help us, please. The family is being attacked and destroyed daily. And how we need your help to restore the family, for strong families. And so we thank you this morning, and we thank you for being a good father to us, and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, if you need prayer for anything, come on up. If there was something else, no, that was it. God bless you guys. Have a good day.